Welcome to the deep dive. We're going to be tackling schizophrenia and paranoia today.
Oh, great topics.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting. And we've got some really interesting source material, too.
Yeah, we do. We've got Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, and Unit 4 PDFs to pull from.
So really thorough stuff.
Really thorough.
So let's just jump right into it, okay?
Okay.
Schizophrenia. So, I think we've all seen the movies and TV shows that portray schizophrenia as this, like, split personality kind of thing.
Right.
But you're saying that that's not really accurate.
Yeah, it's definitely a misconception.
Okay.
Schizophrenia is a biological disorder.
Hmm.
It's more like, diabetes or cancer than it is like having multiple personalities.
Oh, okay.
It's not caused by bad parenting.
Right.
It's not a sign of weakness or anything like that.
So it's important to understand that.
Yeah, it's really important.
So if it's a biological condition, when does it usually, like, show up? When do people start showing signs?
Yeah, so typically it emerges like in young adulthood.
Mm.
Onset after 40 is pretty rare.
Hmm.
But what's really interesting is that there's a gender split in the age of onset.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like between 16 and 25, more men are diagnosed.
Okay.
But then between 25 and 30, it flips and more women are diagnosed.
Wow, that's so strange. What could explain that?
I know. It makes you think.
Yeah, that's a head scratcher.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we can table that for now, but Unit 1 talks a lot about cognitive impairment as, like, a major part of schizophrenia.
Right.
So what exactly does that mean for someone with schizophrenia? What does that look like?
Just imagine like struggling to focus on simple tasks, following a conversation,
Okay.
remembering what you had for breakfast.
Oh, wow.
Cognitive impairment can affect like almost every aspect of thinking,
That-
especially attention.
And that must make everyday life so difficult.
It really does.
Yeah. So one of the sources brought up this theory about hypoxia,
Yes.
which is low oxygen levels during birth as a possible risk factor for
Right.
schizophrenia.
Yeah, and there was a study that they mentioned that was able to differentiate 90% of people with schizophrenia from the control group
Wow.
based on this.
Based on hypoxia.
Yeah.
Wow. So how could that happen? How could low oxygen at birth lead to something like this later in life?
Well, the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that's crucial for forming new memories, is particularly vulnerable to damage from hypoxia.
Okay.
And studies have shown that people with schizophrenia often have a smaller hippocampus, potentially because of this.
Because of the lack of oxygen.
Yeah, at birth.
So it happens early on, but the effects aren't apparent until later.
Exactly.
Wow. That's wild.
It is.
But it's not just hypoxia, right?
And other factors like prenatal stress,
Okay.
malnutrition in the womb,
Mm.
even infections during pregnancy,
Oh, wow.
all being investigated as potential risk factors.
And then there's that thing about older fathers, too.
Yeah, paternal age,
Paternal age.
the factor too.
Huh. So like a web of different things that could be at play here. Absolutely.
And then, of course, there's the cannabis debate, right?
Yeah.
I know that came up in the source material too.
Oh, it did. Yeah.
So, I mean, it doesn't cause schizophrenia on its own, right?
Right.
But there's some evidence to suggest that it can increase the risk.
Yeah. Potentially even doubling it, according to a review.
So it's something to be cautious about,
Yeah, definitely.
especially, during adolescence when the brain is still developing.
Right. Exactly.
So it sounds like we're talking about a very complex interplay
Yeah.
of different things like genetics and environmental factors and substance use.
It's really not a one-size-fits-all explanation.
It's not a simple answer.
Not at all.
Okay, so we've got a good groundwork laid for schizophrenia, I think.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to paranoia. What do you think?
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, so how is paranoia different from just being, a little suspicious?
Well, paranoia is a lot more than just being a little suspicious.
Okay.
It's like deeply ingrained distrust of others.
Like a pervasive belief that people are trying to harm you
Oh, wow.
or deceive you,
Even if there's no evidence.
even when there's no evidence.
So they might even see like acts of kindness as manipulation.
Exactly.
Oh,
They
yeah.
might see it as someone trying to, gain their trust
Right.
and then exploit them.
That must make forming close relationships so difficult.
It's incredibly isolating.
Yeah, that makes sense. Unit 2 describes paranoid individuals as like eager observers.
Yeah.
We're constantly scanning for threats.
Right.
I guess that makes sense given the way they see the world.
It does, but that hypervigilance often comes at a cost.
Oh, how so?
Well, they can become so fixated on these perceived threats
Okay.
that they miss the bigger picture.
Hmm.
They misinterpret situations
Right.
and
Right.
the intentions of others.
So it becomes like a vicious cycle then.
Yeah, a cycle of suspicion and isolation.
This actually reminds me of something we were talking about before with schizophrenia.
Oh, yeah.
Those cognitive impairments. Could that make someone more likely to develop paranoia?
That's a really good point, yeah. The cognitive challenges with schizophrenia can make it harder to accurately interpret, like, social cues and intentions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that can lead to paranoia.
So it's not just that paranoia can exist alongside schizophrenia,
Right.
but the schizophrenia could actually be contributing to the paranoia.
Exactly.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It is.
And kind of sad too, a little bit.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I think this has been a really good overview of schizophrenia and paranoia so far.
I agree.
We've learned a lot
Well, you have.
about the biological underpinnings, the potential causes, and even the impact of cognitive impairments.
Yeah.
But there's still so much more to uncover.
Oh, definitely.
So stay tuned for part 2, where we'll continue our deep dive into the fascinating world of the human mind.
Definitely.
See you then?
See you there. Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
So before the break, we were talking about paranoia and how it can be like a symptom of schizophrenia.
Yeah, and I wanted to shift gears a little bit to a condition called delusional disorder.
Okay.
So what's really interesting about delusional disorder is that people with it often maintain a pretty normal outward appearance. Like they can hold down jobs, have relationships, seem perfectly fine to everyone
Okay.
until their delusions come to light.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of hidden then.
Yeah, in a way.
So what kind of delusions are we talking about?
Well, they can be all sorts of things.
Okay.
But they're often categorized as non-bizarre.
Non-bizarre. Okay.
Meaning they involve situations that could happen in real life,
Okay.
but they're either untrue or like vastly exaggerated.
I see.
So for instance, someone with delusional disorder might believe they're being followed
Okay.
or cheated on or poisoned,
Right.
even though there's no evidence.
So I imagine it must be really frustrating for their loved ones.
It can be really tough.
Yeah, trying to convince them otherwise. And Unit 2 mentions this thing called lack of insight.
Yes.
What does that mean exactly?
So lack of insight basically means that the person doesn't recognize that their thinking is distorted
Okay.
or that their beliefs aren't based on reality.
So they really believe it.
They truly believe it.
Wow.
And it can make treatment really challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because even if you present them with evidence,
Right.
it's hard for them to see it.
So it's not a matter of them being like stubborn or choosing to believe it.
Right. It's not like that.
They really perceive the world this way.
Exactly. It's like their brain is creating this false reality.
That's wild. It really is. So within delusional disorder, are there like different subtypes?
Yeah, there are different themes.
Yeah.
So for example, erotomania,
Erotomania, yeah.
that's where someone believes that someone else,
Okay.
often a celebrity or someone in power,
Right.
is secretly in love with them.
I've heard of that one. I didn't realize it was a subtype, though.
Yeah, it's a class.
Are there other ones that are, like, interesting?
Oh, definitely. There's grandiose delusions,
Okay.
where someone believes they have exceptional talents, wealth, or power.
Right, like beyond what's actually true.
Way beyond.
That's really
There's
interesting.
persecutory. Right.
Yeah, persecutory delusions, which we talked about a little bit before.
Yeah. Feeling like they're being conspired against or followed or something.
Exactly.
And then somatic delusions.
Yes, where the focus is on imagined physical defects or illnesses.
So many different ways these delusions can manifest.
It's incredible, isn't it?
But you mentioned earlier that delusions can be a symptom of other things too, right?
It's right.
Not just delusional disorder.
Yeah, so delusions can occur in other mental health disorders.
Right.
Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder.
Oh, wow.
But here's what's even more interesting.
Okay.
They can also be triggered by medical conditions,
Medical conditions.
like brain tumors, infections, hormonal imbalances,
Oh, wow, really?
and even some substance. So you're telling me that something like a brain tumor or taking certain medications could make someone experience delusions.
That's possible, yeah.
That's blurring the lines a lot.
It really does blur the lines between mental and physical health.
Wow. Okay.
And that actually brings us to another interesting topic.
What's that?
Psychotic disorders. Due to general medical conditions.
Unit 3 talked about that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so how can these physical ailments, like, trigger those mental experiences?
Well, let's start with neurological disorders.
Okay.
So epilepsy, for example, isn't just about seizures.
Okay.
It can sometimes cause memory problems, mood swings, and even hallucinations,
Wow.
which are all hallmark symptoms of psychosis.
So it might look like a mental health problem,
Right.
but it could actually be like an early sign of something neurological.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
That's pretty amazing.
It is.
What about Parkinson's?
Yeah, so with Parkinson's, there's the tremors and the rigidity.
Right.
But a lot of people with Parkinson's also experience things like depression, anxiety, and even psychotic symptoms.
And those can happen before the motor symptoms even show up.
Often, yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
And then brain tumors are really interesting too.
Okay, what about them?
So did you know that up to 50% of people with brain tumors experience psychiatric symptoms before they have any neurological symptoms?
No way. Really?
Yeah, which often leads to misdiagnosis.
Oh, wow, that's a problem.
It highlights how important it is to get a thorough medical evaluation.
Yeah, for sure.
When someone has those sudden changes in behavior or mental state.
Definitely rule everything out, right?
Exactly.
What about hormonal imbalances? Can those play a role?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Hormones have a huge impact on our brains
Okay.
and our moods.
Right.
So, for example, hyperthyroidism can cause anxiety, restlessness, even mania.
And that can be mistaken for psychosis?
It can, yeah.
What about hypothyroidism?
Hypothyroidism often presents as depression, fatigue,
Okay.
difficulty concentrating.
And those are things that could be missed if they don't test for thyroid issues.
Exactly.
Huh.
Even adrenal disorders can cause things like apathy, fatigue, and even psychosis.
Really? So even like our adrenal glands, these tiny things, can
Right.
have such a big impact on our mental well-being.
It's wild, isn't it?
It is. It makes you really appreciate how delicate the balance is
It does.
in our bodies.
Absolutely.
And then there's electrolyte imbalances too, right?
Yeah, that's another one.
Something like a sodium imbalance.
It can trigger irritability, confusion, and in severe cases, hallucinations.
It's amazing how these tiny imbalances in our body chemistry can have such a big impact on our mental state.
It really is.
Okay, so we've talked about medical conditions and hormonal things.
Yeah.
What about substances?
Ah, yes, substance use.
This is substance-induced psychotic disorder, right?
Yep, Unit 4 covers this one.
Okay, I know that, like, LSD can cause hallucinations, but
Right.
how is that different from this disorder?
Well, with substance-induced psychotic disorder, the symptoms can be much more intense,
Okay.
and they can last longer.
Oh, wow.
They can even mimic other psychotic disorders, like schizophrenia.
So someone could, like, have a psychotic episode that's triggered by a substance, and then
Right.
it just keeps going even after they're not using anymore.
Yeah, the symptoms can persist even after the substance is out of their system.
That's scary.
It can be really tough.
What kinds of substances are we talking about here?
Well, it can be a lot of things.
Okay.
Alcohol, for instance.
Alcohol.
Yeah, you know how withdrawal from alcohol can cause delirium tremens?
I've heard of that. Yeah, sounds awful.
It is. It's a really dangerous condition
Okay.
with confusion, agitation, vivid hallucinations.
So not just a hangover.
No, not just a hangover.
What about other things?
Well, stimulants like cocaine and amphetamines,
Right.
those can cause paranoia and intense delusions, especially with heavy use.
Oh.
Even cannabis can trigger anxiety, paranoia, and psychotic symptoms in some people.
Wow. So really a lot of different substances can have these effects.
It really highlights the importance of being aware of the risks
Yeah, definitely.
and getting help if you need it.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive.
We have.
We've learned that delusions can be triggered by all sorts of things.
Right.
Medical conditions, hormones, substances.
Yeah. It's not as simple as we might think.
It really makes you think about the connection between the mind and body.
Exactly. It's all connected.
All connected.
And it's important to take a holistic view
I agree.
when it comes to health.
For sure. Well, this has been really eye-opening.
It has.
I'm looking forward to wrapping it all up in the last part.
Me too. We've got some great final thoughts to share.
Awesome. Can't wait. We'll be right back after a short break.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on this crazy journey through schizophrenia, paranoia, and even how medical conditions and substances can trigger similar experiences. It really is fascinating how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how we can't separate the mind and body like we used to.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways our listeners should keep in mind?
Well, first of all, we have to break down the stigma around mental illness. Like schizophrenia, paranoia, these are real medical conditions.
Yeah.
They're brain-based, just like any other illness.
Right, not a sign of weakness or bad parenting or anything like that.
Exactly. And I think it's really important to remember that the lines between mental and physical health are blurry.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that.
You know, we've seen how physical problems, hormones, substances, they can all trigger experiences that look like mental health disorders.
So we really need to look at the whole person, not just their symptoms.
Absolutely. And it's also important to remember that psychosis is a spectrum.
Right.
It's not just one thing.
It can show up in so many different ways.
Exactly. From wild changes in perception to, full-blown hallucinations.
Yeah, and so many things can influence it.
So many things.
Genetics, brain chemistry, environment, social support, everything.
It really is like a puzzle, and we're still figuring out how all the pieces fit together.
So for all you deep divers out there, are there any areas you'd like to explore further? Any questions that are still on your mind?
Well, one area that I'm really interested in is the critical period hypothesis.
Oh, yeah. What's that about?
It suggests that there's a window of time, usually early on in psychosis, where intervention can be the most effective.
Oh, wow. So early treatment could really make a difference.
Yeah, potentially change someone's whole life.
That's incredible. But I imagine there are a lot of challenges with that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Like, how do we identify people at risk? How do we provide the right support early on?
Yeah, and there are ethical considerations too, right? Like respecting someone's autonomy, even if they might not fully understand their diagnosis.
Exactly. And another thing I think about a lot is how culture influences how we see and experience these things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like what might be a delusion in one culture could be a spiritual experience in another.
Exactly. So we have to be really careful about how we diagnose and treat people from different backgrounds.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Not at all.
And that brings us to another big question, the ethics of involuntary commitment.
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one.
When is it okay to restrict someone's freedom to protect them or others?
It's a really complex issue.
It really is. I mean, this whole deep dive has been about more than just science.
Definitely.
We're talking about ethics, values, social justice.
All of it. I think mental health is this constantly evolving field.
Yeah, and it's a journey we're all on.
It really is.
Yeah.
The more we learn, the better we understand ourselves and each other.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you learned something new, challenged your assumptions, and maybe even came up with some new questions of your own.
I hope so.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.